Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, wherever you may be. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Yana Aranda, and I am a project manager at the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and also working quite closely with all the folks at IEEE on the Engineering for Change initiative. Today you are here for the IEEE Humanitarian Technology webinar series, and we are going to be focusing on local infrastructure service delivery in developing countries. That's going to be a topic led by our speaker, Mr. Matt Sissel, who is a lead structural engineer for the YCF group. I will give a brief bio about him in a few minutes. Just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that our webinar coordinator, Adrian Pace, who represents the IEEE Foundation, has been tremendous in actually pulling this series together. And I'm going to ask Alex to advance the slide for me as my mouse is dead. Thank you, Alex. So just a FYI on the Humanitarian Technology webinar series. This is a free and publicly available webinar series. The URL for additional webinars, which are also recorded, is located right there. It is focused on applying technology to solve the world's most pressing humanitarian and development challenges, and we're glad you joined us. Next slide, please. The team behind the webinar series, as I mentioned, Adrian Pace is the coordinator, but as you can see, includes an international group of IEEE volunteers and staff, as well as some of us from ASME and other parts of the organization. Next, please. So right now, as you're joining the webinar series, I would like you to please enter your name and location in the Q&A or chat window on the left-hand side of the screen, please. We just like to know where you guys are all coming from. It's quite interesting for us. During the webinar, please enter any questions that you have in that same chat window, and the presenter will answer all the selections of questions at the end. After the webinar, please do return to the URL for the e-learning tool from IEEE, humanitarian.ieee.org, and you'll be able to receive your personalized certificate of completion, which equates to 1 professional development hour for those of you who do have that requirement. Next slide, please. So I'd like to make sure to share with you the information about our next webinar, which is going to be on the 28th of March of this year. The title for the webinar focus is going to be on Village Energy, a systems-based approach to understanding and addressing rural energy needs. Our speaker will be Nathan Johnson, who is a mechanical engineer, not a medical engineer, at Homer Energy. For more information, of course, please visit the Humanitarian Engineering webinar series site. Next slide, please. And, of course, we have to give a shout-out to our host today. We would like to encourage all of you who are interested to become IEEE members and continue gaining knowledge, sharing IEEE shares most current information on the changing world of technology. Of course, be a part of their fantastic community and do advance your profession. So you can go to IEEE.org to find out more information. Next slide, please. And now we're going to talk a little bit about today's webinar. So as I mentioned, the title of today's webinar is Local Infrastructure Service Delivery in Developing Countries. And for those of you who are watching the chat window, we see that Matt has actually entered his location. Thanks, Matt. Matt Sissel is the lead structural engineer for YCF Group. He's also a construction manager and quality control manager. YCF is an architecture, construction, and consultation firm based in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. He is an experienced structural engineer with 7 years in engineering and construction in the U.S. and abroad. He has a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Columbia University and spent 4 years at Parsons Birkenhofer at the New York City office in the Structural Engineering Division, working on a variety of bridge, tunnel, and subway projects. In addition to his time at Parsons Birkenhofer, and during graduate studies at NYU, Matt worked on a variety of small-scale infrastructure projects in developing countries for a variety of non-governmental organizations. His roles vary from administrative to planning, design, and construction supervision. In May 2011, he received his Master's of Arts from NYU Glatton School of Individualized Study, concentrating in international development and infrastructure service delivery. He attended on a Reynolds Fellowship in Social Entrepreneurship. Prior to joining YCF Group, he worked as a volunteer with Engineers Without Borders USA and other groups on projects in Kenya, El Salvador, Honduras, and Southern Sudan. Since joining YCF Group in June 2011, he has managed the completion of 2 primary school projects near Legoan and is currently supervising 3 school projects in the area and is the quality control manager of a fire station project for the U.S. Navy and Jeremy Haiti. So with that, I would like to invite Matt to take over running the slide deck and sharing some information on infrastructure projects and local service delivery.
Well, thank you, Yana, for that very lovely introduction. I think before I get started, I want to welcome everyone here taking the time in the middle of the morning to come listen to me talk about something I'm very passionate about, which is infrastructure in developing countries for community development and poverty alleviation. And before I get too far into it, I would just like to calibrate with Yana. How does it sound right now?
The sound is very good, Matt. Thank you. If anybody has trouble hearing Matt, do please notify us in the chat window. Thank you, Matt.
Okay. And I apologize to everyone listening in, but I'm speaking today from Port-au-Prince, and as such, the connection is a little bit wonky, and there's going to be a lot of noises, coming from the surrounding environment. I've done my best to eliminate as much of that as I could. So let's get started. Welcome again. Infrastructure projects and local service delivery. 2 very important or interesting sort of topics for me, and this is really about local capacity building. So we're going to talk about small-scale projects that promote poverty alleviation in developing countries, and talk about how this can also support local service delivery. So many individuals and groups are well aware of the impact of properly designed, implemented, and maintained infrastructure and design projects and the impact they can have on communities in developing countries. Many of us are well versed in concepts like sustainable design, appropriate technology, participatory practice, and empowerment. And constantly are incorporating and experimenting with these ideas in our projects. But what about those projects the community will see in the future after we're done? How will those projects go? And how can we approach our projects now to affect those projects in the future? So this webinar will discuss the features of local service delivery when discussing infrastructure projects, which is how infrastructure is developed and implemented within the area as a service provided by government or others. Next, I'll introduce some of the impacts of interventions coming from outside that environment, i.e. international organizations that support development. And make a case for considering how the project itself fits within the local service delivery context in order to guide decisions made during the planning, design, and implementation of a project to ensure long-term project success, as well as promoting service delivery on the ground. And just a quick note about language. A lot of the words I'll be using are loaded. You'll see local often in the presentation, and this refers to very much a sense of we're dealing with specifically the area that's impacted by the project. And the project itself is small scale, so I'll be using small scale a lot just to emphasize that we're not really talking about national highway systems or citywide, water systems. These are really, the context here is really just community-based development. And lastly, a big issue here is service delivery, but I will be expanding on that concept as we go. So quickly, going over the outline so you know a little bit more what you can expect during the presentation. I'll be starting with an introduction. We'll discuss a little bit of my personal motivation in putting together this presentation, and some of our shared goals that bring us here together today. And then sort of try to outline a little bit of the overarching purpose of the presentation itself. Next is background. I'll discuss some of the vocabulary of infrastructure projects in terms of topics and concepts in order to make sure everyone's up on the same page, because I don't want, it's important to me that we sort of have the same grounding or basis when taking this further. This will set us up to talk about service delivery, and this is the overarching framework within which we all operate as designers and builders. Lastly, and this should be the good part, I'm going to discuss projects within this framework of service delivery. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to lead up with some background and theory, and by the time we get to the set part 4, we'll be discussing the application side. How does this heavy stuff really apply to the projects themselves on the ground? And I'd also like to leave ample time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. So as a first-time webinar presenter myself, I'm a little bit more familiar with speaking in a public setting, either giving presentations for audiences or as a lecturer in a college classroom. So it's hard for me to really gauge my audience. I'm used to seeing students falling asleep, and that's usually a good sense that maybe they're not with me right now. Maybe I've done something wrong along the way, and I failed to keep them with me. So without that, I'll mainly be relying on you guys to sort of really use these funny little icons to especially tell me if you're confused or want me to slow down a little bit. And I really appreciate that, even in the chat. So mainly this presentation is going to mix a little bit of text, a lot of pictures and diagrams to illustrate the topic. And I prefer to leave questions for the end of the presentation. If you have something comes up that strikes you along the way, please feel free to put it in the chat. Okay. So a little bit about my motivation that brings me for you today. As I mentioned earlier, I started working in developing countries back in 2006 when I started volunteering with Engineers Without Borders based in New York City. My first project was a water project in Kenya, and I traveled there for the first time in early 2006. First of all, based on my experience, I knew I was hooked. That's all it took. One site visit, 1 week, 2 weeks with the community, and I knew that this is something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Second, I became obsessed with the doubt that was born in me at that time, which really born out of this idea of what's my role in this context. So my mission then became to understand my role as an outsider in poverty alleviation projects in developing countries, and I guess as an extension of that, better understand what it actually means to be sustainable. However, this sort of pursuit took a back burner for a while, then sort of came back a couple of years later. So as I said, I was working as a volunteer for Engineers Without Borders, and we were providing engineering expertise to a community in Kenya with Macaulay CS, a donor based in New York City. We were tasked with determining developing a water system for a community of about 1,500 people. Now, early on, my work brought me in contact with local government. We were generally very cordial when dealing with local government officials, but wary of their direct involvement because we often hear rumors or talk about, they're corrupt or they're incompetent, and so we generally advise, make a courtesy visit, inform government of our presence and intentions, ask if there's any regulations or submissions we need. But apart from that, the less government involvement, the better. So, cut to late July 2009, I was back working in the same community in Kenya on a new project. But while I was there, I stopped by the office of the newly appointed district water officer. That's Dundu in the bottom right corner of the screen. I met him in 2006 when he was an engineer working part-time for the water office. And at this point, he was now promoted to the officer, the head of the district. And he was excited to tell me about planning to deliver potable water to a community, the actual community I was working in, and a number of communities all over the area, covering about 25,000 people. Now for him, he was excited because years ago, about 15 to 20 years earlier, he was working with a different NGO based in the U.S., and they had built a project that ended up falling with disrepair. But now he's in a position of authority, he's in a position of power in the local government, and he could actually allocate the necessary funds to see the project through. So there we are, sitting across the desk from one another. He's showing me trophies that he won for running the best district water office in all of the region. And we're sitting there talking about the same type of work, we do the same type of thing. We're both in a position to deliver infrastructure to the same community, but there was no actual means for us to collaborate. I knew the scenario couldn't be unique to the situation, and I knew I had to sort of take this further and study it further. I said, I want to understand both why something like this could happen, and then give myself some guidance on how to approach it in the future. Some more contradiction existed, where two systems, one local and one foreign, coexisted, delivering infrastructure projects to developing countries. And I wanted to find a way to reconcile that. So I wanted to make sense of all these actors participating in the space in order to make sense of this contradiction. And I knew my personal contribution was important. I knew that what I was doing for the community was helping the community. But this got me thinking about the projects I couldn't support, the ones that he could outside of my community, or in the future. And this began to help me define my personal goals. So, let's see. Before I answer some of those more existential questions, I kind of want to take a moment to sort of go over what brings us here together and establish some common ground. So we're all here because we're interested in international development and poverty alleviation in some way, shape, or form. We most likely are involved in engineering and design, and may or may not have experience on these small-scale projects that promote community development. And many of us who have this experience are drawn to it for personal and practical reasons. Like the personal connection you make from working with the community is something that you can't replace. And at the same time, the skills you learn and sort of the way your eyes are open during this work is something that we also grow from. As a result, become better professionals ourselves. And at the same time, there are a number of challenges when approaching development work. First of all, development is new. It's been around for over 60 years, and the results at best have been mixed. The need is great still, and there's been a lot of work that's been done already. If you consider the development industry, USAID, UN, World Bank, all these organizations and the companies that support them, they have a bad rep. You know, you can read about or often hear about people complaints about these organizations, and some is merit and some is not. But this is the reality of where we work. And further, something that I see is very important is that as engineers and designers in infrastructure, we face stiff competition from other sectors. Now, let me weird to say there's competition in development, but health, education, governance, empowerment, financing, all these sectors are competing for the same dollars for development aid. And it's up to us to really understand how is the challenge to us being able to provide the interventions we see so valuable. And all you have to do is look at the Millennium Development Goals, the UN, the international community agreed upon list of goals for moving countries out of poverty, starting in 2000 and moving to 2015. You see that infrastructure isn't even included in the list. Sure, it's a subset of health needs, clinics, it's a subset of education for people who are in these schools, but roads provide access and power provides economic opportunity. So these things are all very connected, but infrastructure itself has sort of lost primacy in the last 20, 30 years. So then what's the purpose of this presentation? For me, it's mostly about elaborating on the big picture, trying to start dialogues about considering sustainability beyond the narrow project scope and looking at the project in the context of its environment. Not environmental design, but the people, services, and organizations that exist in a community and surrounding communities. And my belief is that by considering the bigger picture of service delivery, this can aid our decision making at the project level. So a big one is how, when, and why we use concepts like sustainable design, appropriate technology, community participation, empowerment. We know these things are important, but sometimes they're contradictory. And what I'm proposing is that considering the service delivery environment will actually aid in making decisions about these important areas. And ultimately, what I like to do is improve our toolboxes, professionals working in developing countries. What is largely involved is taking existing ideas and incorporating them in new ways, and it's how we work as engineers and designers. And I just want to make one final note at the end of the section is nothing in this presentation is new. It's all based on readings, observations, studies from other disciplines. This is really a synthesis of ideas, not an innovation. So let's get into the project vocabulary. I've already brought up these concepts like sustainable design, appropriate technology, participation, empowerment. Sustainable designs are tools that designers use to influence whether the project will last a long time, will be comfortable, will use less energy. Appropriate technology seeks to take the discussion in developing context to what is appropriate at the local level and people can use and apply. Participation is all about getting communities involved in projects, and empowerment is participation with real positions of authority, making differences. I'll use projects very generally, but there's a whole host of projects to apply to, and when working on projects, all sorts of actors get involved, taking on a variety of roles. And throughout a project, the actual things going on will vary. So this one covers very briefly. So ultimately, why projects? So I'm going on and on about service delivery. Why do I care about projects? I care about projects because projects can offer an impact. They're a discrete unit of effort that can, the result of that project, can make an impact in terms of health on a community if it's a water system, or education if it's a school. So projects are how we make incremental changes to development, to communities. And so I think that they're very important. They should continue to be the space in the main world in which we operate. So projects, there's many ways to organize projects. You can talk about public or private infrastructure. You can talk about various disciplines, architecture, structural, civil, mechanical. Talk about the impact of projects. The impact in the health of the community, the education, economics, or access. But generally what we're talking about when we're talking about projects, and also, like I said before, small-scale projects, we're talking about structures like residences or institutions like schools, government buildings, and then roads or bridges, dams, clinics, schools, again, education, water systems, sanitation. These are the types of projects generally we're talking about, and we're referring to small-scale projects. Say I'm talking about a bridge, maybe it's not cable stay bridge, maybe it's the footbridge you see in the picture in the center there. Or, a water system might have a tank and rely on gravity. And a school like this one shown here on the right, could be a simple open classroom building made of wood with no electrical, mechanical, or other systems involved. And so what are some of the actors we'll be talking about? Generally, I would make a distinction between local and external actors. At the local level, there could be government, businesses, the beneficiaries of the projects, community-based organizations. Coming from outside, they're often non-governmental organizations or donors or international organizations. And oftentimes, we speak in terms of sector, public sector, private sector, or the civil society sector. Civil societies were community-based organizations and non-governmental organizations or NGOs are often emerging. And all these actors take on a variety of roles for the project, sometimes switching, moving during the project to be the funder, the client, as a consultant providing design services with a contractor. And the community beneficiary itself will get involved. And then after the project is complete, it enters this normal life. And there's operation and maintenance, and then also the beneficiary, the user of the building, be it a school or water purchasers at a water system. And just very briefly, each project will go through a lot of phases or stages as it goes from conception to execution to just sort of follow through. And it involves planning, resource allocation, identifying the project, either the project itself, like working in a community and the community decides to get a school, or maybe you're a bridge building organization and you're identifying the community where the bridge is going to go. Then there's the familiar appraisal design, construction, operating and maintaining of complete, and more where there's the luxury of time and money monitoring and evaluating the project, sort of learn from this process. I'm going to be focusing mainly on the ideas of planning, design, construction, and operational maintenance. Okay, so now that we have this vocabulary, let's talk about some projects. Starting with post-earthquake reconstruction in Haiti, one of the major concerns was the housing stock and the loss of housing in the people living in temporary communities all over the country, especially in the city of Port-au-Prince. And so the issue is, how do we prevent or reduce the impact of these disasters in the future? That's a long-term goal, but in the short term, we need to replace housing stock. So USAID come in and offer to fund 750 homes, but for a cost of what, $15 million? And how many homes are we talking about? Total needed. I mean, it could be over 100,000 homes needed. It ends up being a small drop of the bucket that requires a sizable effort. And then what about the people with damaged homes? So another organization can say repair 1,000 homes with a very damaged money, or can train builders to repair homes. So now we're talking about, getting people moving in a direction of filling their own needs. But these same organizations are going to be limited by money, regulations, material, and then culture. What do I mean by culture? What if there's a culture of building that will accept new homes and new work based on what the organizations are providing, but once the organization is leaving, it turns directly to the old way of living. And I'm not just speculating, that's literally happening here in Haiti. So what this conversation starts to get us thinking about is, how do we approach these same issues in terms of service delivery? Alternatively, we can consider community development. So this is a community where I worked in Kenya that I brought up before, and we're working with this one community. And so we were tasked with all the developmental needs of this one community. We start with the water system, we build a school, maybe a clinic next, or a power source. What more can we offer? What are the next steps?
We may have lost Matt for a minute. He did mention that there is a risk of a brownout while he is delivering the webinar. Please, let's give him a minute to rejoin us. So while we wait, I would just like to give everybody a little bit of background. Matt and I have collaborated previously as members of Engineers Without Borders here in New York City. I see he's returned, and the project that he is discussing here in Kenya is actually a project of the New York Professional Chapter of Engineers Without Borders. So this is very close to my heart as well, and I'm excited to hear more about it. Matt, I hear you're back.
Yes, sorry about that. I decided to take a brief hiatus.
No problem.
Right, and
no
so
problem. Thank you.
We're just talking about projects. Yeah, and so this is another example of starting to think about the impact of the project in the larger context of the environment and that service delivery. So I'll be switching back and forth between my work in Haiti and my work in Kenya to illustrate some of these concepts as we go. And if you have any more questions about the project themselves later on, feel free to ask away. But mainly using them for examples, so it's not going to be like a full analysis or case study of the project. So, this discussion of service delivery in terms of those projects brings us to maybe the need to discuss service delivery a little bit in more detail. So, one of the diagrams I like in this section is an extension diagram, so prepare yourself. Is this one here where we talk about policymakers setting policies for providers to provide services to the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries then hold policymakers to account through the democratic process. Now, this service delivery cycle generally describes ongoing services, like say a water company. Policymakers select the water company, the water company provides services, and so on. But this could also describe public infrastructure as well. And so looking at a little more detail, policymakers might involve local government, or it can apply to the owners or clients of the infrastructure project. They might set policies, but also just give money to the providers, which is the local government sectors, maybe the water office, or businesses and civil societies. These services then provided to beneficiaries who can possibly, vote on express their displeasure or pleasure in the providers the use of user fees and consumer rights. However, what's a major challenge in developing countries is that outsiders often bypass these systems. Now, they can bypass them because the system doesn't exist, or does it seem to exist. It can be weak or corrupt, or it can lack the resources to actually provide services. Or further, the NGO could simply just not even be aware that these systems are in place. And so, instead, international agencies and donors provide, and NGOs themselves provide services and projects directly to the beneficiaries, cutting off this cycle. And so, you'll see these green dots, and generally I'm referring to international organizations. Now, there are a number of organizations that actually don't do that bypassing model, and they find ways to facilitate local infrastructure services. And what they'll do that by either working directly with policymakers, local governments, clients, and owners, setting up policies, learning decentralization, providing funding, basically capacity building. And on the other side of the providers, they'll support them through collaboration and facilitation, again, capacity building to provide these services to the beneficiaries. Now, these are the types of models that I think are more beneficial, so I'll be using it in the next slide. So let's take a closer look at policymakers. Who are they and what do they do? So this is the left-hand side of the diagram, and what I've done is sort of expand it vertically in terms of its hierarchy. Oftentimes, we're talking about the district level, so this is you can see my pointer. This is really the local level, the district down to the village, down to the individual farm. And this is where a lot of organizations will direct their focus. So if that's the vertical hierarchy, and the policymaker often sits at the district level, which is often comprised of not only the individuals who make up the offices, but also their rules, regulations, and codes that they must follow, as well as financial, human, and physical resources that they can bring to bear on a project. And even though before I was showing government administration, which could also be water departments, Ministry of Health, education, and all those other sectors. As you can see, coming from the top-down policies and priorities, guidelines, budget support, we're all taking this route down the hierarchy. And on the other side of the diagram are the providers. So who are they? They're the designers, contractors, foremen, supervisors, skilled and unskilled laborers. They're all the people working in infrastructure that help make the projects get delivered. And oftentimes, when dealing with when looking to support providers, you'll find that there are gaps in this pyramid where they're missing engineers and technologists that can actually execute these projects. These are the places where NGOs, outsiders can step in and support this work. And then there's the service delivery supply chain. The owners, look the designers, contractors, fabricators, and suppliers. So all these groups, companies, nonprofits, for-profits, actors, they're all sort of participating in the service delivery environment. And this makes up the greater context. The context isn't so much geographical as it is about people and who's available. And then it's about their knowledge bases and rules that they follow in order to actually execute projects. So again, let's return to this little diagram of policymakers, providers, and beneficiaries. That's very nice and it makes for a nice story, but in our case, services are actually delivered as projects. And projects are delivered a little bit more like this. There's discrete units, and I have this diagram on the right of a conventional design bid build project where the owner who wants to build a school will hire an architect. The architect will hire engineers and provide a design to the owner, who will then turn look for a contractor and pull out the bid. So it's kind of difficult to see how this and this design, this model sort of matches with the policymaker, provider, and beneficiary model. So what we can do is unwrap it a little bit. I spoke before about focusing mainly on the planning, design, construction, and operation and maintenance of the project. If we think about those steps in the project, we can associate the policymaker, provider, and beneficiary model to those stages. And so this proposes that policymakers are more involved in the planning side, whereas the providers provide the design and construction services along either conventional design bid build model, or it could be just a design build model, or maybe not that much thought is gone into it. What the model looks like, but somebody providing the thing that gets there at the end of the day. And then at the end of the day, you've got a project, and it just starts its life. It's we call it operation and maintenance, but this is now the life of the project. So a project itself can have its own service delivery aspect. You've delivered a water project, you finished your construction, well, now somebody's going to be making policy, and somebody's going to be providing the water, and beneficiaries are going to be benefiting from this, and they're going to pay for services, and they're going to try to influence the policy. And this gives a little bit of direction on how to strategically support our local counterparts in the project process, either through working directly with policymakers or working directly with providers, as I said before. So that's generally the model for service delivery. Which one leads us to what I hope is the interesting part for you guys, and I don't see any signal for people's sleep, but I hope that you're with me at this point. Let's talk about the project and let's frame the project in terms of these ideas of service delivery and ask some sort of tough questions. Why this is even important? How can thinking about the big picture of local service delivery benefit the project itself? Well, I'm proposing that it benefits it in two ways. It can benefit the project in terms of improved outcomes. The project will last longer, it'll be more properly maintained. And also it benefits the service delivery environment itself. We can use the project as an opportunity to train people at the local level to provide services in the future. So what I'm going to focus on now is the providers in planning, design, construction, and implementation through operation and maintenance. And I want to do that in terms of collaboration and facilitation. Ourselves as outsiders, as technicians, engineers, architects, or planners, coming in and working in a developing country, how do we interface with the providers at the local level? And I'm going to frame this discussion from 3 points of view. So this very confusing looking chart down here is really describes the 3 points of view, or 3 starting points for discussing service delivery. The first one, planning. How can we look at planning to influence design, to influence implementation, to actually lead to these outcomes that I suggested earlier? In terms of operation and maintenance, successful projects, in terms of service delivery, improve capacity to deliver projects in the future. Second, we'll look at design, how our actual design of the project can influence the implementation of the project and thus the outcomes or objectives. And then finally, implementation itself. What decisions and actions can we take during implementation? Because we'll look a little bit like this. Planning, how can we plan the process and roles during the project in order to support our desired outcomes? And then design, how can a technical design support these same outcomes? And construction, again, what actions and activities? So, starting with planning, we do this by planning relationships. We've already discussed these two models, say the project delivery model of the design and implementation, and then also the operation and maintenance, the service delivery of the project. So let's go back to that water project in Kenya I've been talking about. How was it implemented? Well, the donor paid an NGO to design a building. So the NGO, also from outside the community, took care of everything. However, it did interface with groups at the local level. At the local water office, it submitted the designs, and the local water office provided the design review and approval. For the providers who would be running the system, so the community-based organization, it provided training for operation and maintenance. And then for the community itself, who were going to use the project, they just relied on the community to provide free volunteer labor for construction. Now, at the end of the day, the project was delivered, and the local water office oversaw a community-based organization that provided water to the users, and users paid for that water, and there was a working system, which is good. So maybe this model did deliver this outcome, but there were some problems along the way. And the biggest problem was that they didn't design a very good project, and only about half the project was actually ever implemented. So for the half of the project that was implemented, it worked fine. So how can we reimagine at least the design and implementation stage in terms of this idea of service delivery? Well, what we want to do is put the policymakers and providers in positions of authority and come up with a model where the project gets delivered by them with the support of the donors and the users. So what I'm showing here is a general contractor construction management model where the local water office provides money and oversight for the community-based organization that's going to later run the project. And the local water office itself can provide design services, whereas the community-based organization can manage construction. And at each step in this system, the donor and the technical expertise coming from outside is going to play a supportive role. Now, this is just one possible example. I could have suggested, you should use a local contractor and a local designer. But this is actually the model which I proposed when trying to come up with a solution to actually fix the system. And the advantage being the community-based organization runs the project. They need to know how to fix it, they need to know how to maintain it, and then possibly how to expand it. And they have resources at the local office. I mean, the guys won a trophy. So this is just an example of how you can change your thinking about setting up the roles of the actors. For design, we're trying to design a project that's going to carry ideas of service delivery in mind. And these design decisions, whether they're sustainable design, appropriate technology, on the service delivery side, is the question of can this project be replicated? Does it respect the local codes or customs, what people are familiar with? Whereas issues that relate to operation and maintenance might be how expensive it is to operate, will there be points that can maintain the system, will the system last a long time? So an example in Haiti, we're a local contractor working for an international client who provides all of its design in-house, and they built a number of schools, and we built 3 or 4 of them for them. And what's most striking about these buildings is the novel design they use. They are very structurally sound, and they employ very interesting little design elements. Like here you can see they've used rubble masonry from the nearby river for input, as opposed to manufactured brick. They're using rubble in the interior walls. Now the main primary structural system is shear wall. So this is a building that's going to be incredibly strong. It's going to survive both seismic events in the future and also hurricanes. And they've included local building materials. So this is more or less a sustainable building. However, I would argue it's not an appropriate building. And my main reasoning for that is, if you look down at this picture, they end up stuccoing over all the walls. So at the end of the day, you've got a building that it's impossible for somebody using it to tell it apart from any other concrete masonry building that they're used to. The same buildings that failed in the earthquake, if you can't differentiate between the two. Further, the design is owned by people outside of the country. So no one, my company can't, and no one else is going to take these designs and try and replicate it. These buildings are going to stand as a testament to good design, but everyone around the building is going to continue building the same way they always have. And on the other hand, looking at a project we did in this village in Kenya, it was a school project. We based our project on local practices and customs, and used that as a starting point to develop a solution that was a little bit more novel. So this is the architect, Charles Newman, who I worked with on the project. We we took the plan from the Ministry of Education and used the same materials that they're used to, same building practices, only with more focus on higher quality materials and better attention to detail. And ended up with a very beautiful building that had very interesting elements like these sloped roofs that extend out where students can read, creating all these sort of interesting spaces. And this is a building that people can interact with. They understand, and they can understand why it's better, and they appreciate why it's better compared to how they normally do. And then when looking at local codes and standards in Haiti, every organization uses their own code. U.S. code, Canadian code, IBC, International Building Code. And it can be very confusing when people come back and start looking at these projects, and each one has their own, basis of design. So one of the things we've done on projects where we have the opportunity to design is start with confined masonry best practices, and then afterwards compare that against international code. So this is the front page of confined masonry practice in Haiti, in Creole, and it's for Haitian buildings. And then using their guidelines, you can check using U.S. code or whatever to see if the buildings will stand up to the earthquakes and hurricanes. We did the same thing in Kenya when we used this Ministry of Education design at the point of departure. We still had to check it against minor seismic hazard and high wind speed. So to verify for ourselves that the building was up to build. So lastly, we get into construction, and we ask ourselves what actions and activities we can take during construction that support service delivery. And on the job, it could be capacity building. We do a lot of on-the-job training laborers. We also train foremen and site supervisors to read drawing specifications and plans. And why do we do this? Because it's part of participation. We want to put decision making into the heads of the people involved in the project so they actually learn and they can contribute to things like scheduling and planning ahead. And this can also give us some guidance on decisions that we tend to choose not to make. For instance, safety. We weren't very concerned with safety in Kenya. And none of my projects we ever produced as-built drawings. But we start thinking about, well, yeah, fine, that's fine for this project. But if we're not, at this point, starting people off on the idea of following best practices, future projects are going to cut corners in the same way. The reason we go through all this trouble is so that, because the builders are the ones who are going to maintain the building afterwards. So two quick examples that include, we have, on one hand, in Kenya, which is again from the architect I worked with, Charles Newman. One of the things he did was introduce rocket stoves in the kitchen at the school. And just automatically, he was very interested in getting all the workers to understand the process and take part of the planning and take part of the design and construction. So what ended up happening was some of the workers got together and started making these same stoves all over the community and selling it as a product. And so this sort of fostered entrepreneurship in the community and helped develop the service delivery environment in the community. And then in Haiti, we often use cash for work. Members of the community get paid a day's wage to do unskilled labor. But this can be an opportunity for them for full-time employment. We've hired a number of really dedicated young people who want to do carpentry and masonry and other things. And we trained them already during the process, so we can take them on to the next project. So this is the conclusion, and I didn't leave as much time as I wanted for questions, but ultimately, this is making a case for looking at a project outside of its context, looking at the project in terms of service delivery, where we change the provider, the contractor, the designers, and all the rest of the people involved in construction from a means of making the project to sort of an end of themselves, helping them do work on projects in the future. So I will stop there. Thank you. So, Yana, would you like to moderate questions if there are any?
Oh, there you go. I hope everybody can hear me. I'd like to... Yes, please. I'd like to thank Matt first and foremost for taking the time to share this incredibly valuable knowledge with us. And I'd like to invite... Hello? Do please enter your questions into the chat bar. Thank you so much for feedback on letting me know that you can hear me. We have one question that came in for you, Matt, which is, what is the best way to communicate with authorities in an area relative to the rules and regulations?
Well, this will always be a very tricky activity. And the real advice I have is communicate early and communicate often. What you find is when dealing with local government or local, even on a smaller scale, community leaders, you can ask a question and get an answer. And then you can ask the same question later and get a totally different answer. So it's really about persistence. If you're interested in rules and regulations, they'll tell you just pay this fee and you'll be fine. And you say, what's the fee for? He goes, oh, it's for, you have to do this and this. And you're like, okay, that's fine. Is there a receipt of that? And then from there, the conversation will continue and say, well, is that because you're the mayor or because it's what the government requires? And you start learning to ask questions with authorities in a variety of directions. So it's, you end up sort of going around, finding the answers in a very roundabout way to persist. It's about awareness that, there could be written codes, there could be unwritten codes, there could be something in a database somewhere in the capital city that nobody ever pays attention to. But it's really just about persistence and familiarity with a lot of different possibilities. Does that answer your question?
Hopefully it does. Thank you, Gary, for asking that. Are there any other questions? I do have a question for you, Matt. In listening through this and considering we only have a few minutes, I do encourage you to keep it as short as possible. I was wondering if you could speak to any of the challenges that you've experienced in connecting with policymakers and establishing that line of communication.
Well, in Haiti, I've been very limited because I work for a construction company. And our role is very tightly limited to the construction phase. And we rely on the client to take that role of interfacing with policymakers on a project. Now, I can see that it's not, at times, it's not how I would choose to do it, but, you have to sometimes respect that. And in other projects where I've been a volunteer, I find myself to say, this footprint project in Honduras, a lot of this legwork happened before, was facilitated by others. And then when I'm on the ground, I realize that, my expectations with the local government is vastly different from their expectations, because at no point do people sit down and begin to understand each other at the onset of the process. And that can definitely cause, strife later on in the process.
Thank you very much, Matt. We have run over time, so unfortunately we're going to have to cut off any further questions, but just wanted to let everybody know that this webinar has been recorded and will be available. Please do visit the e-learning URL that we noted at the beginning of the webinar for the full recording. And also, we do hope that you will join us on the next webinar, which will be on March 28th, focusing on village electrification. That's a tough one to get out. I'd like to thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you for your attention and your questions, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. If you'd like to contact Matt, you can reach out to the moderators of this webinar, and we will put you in touch. Have a great day or evening, everybody, and we look forward to you joining us one more time. Take care. Bye-bye.